What's up, everybody? So, one of those rare occasions where my ire has been drawn for me to make a little video summary response. So, there's an individual on my Obama healthcare bill as constitutional by modern jurisprudence who wants to sift through the economics of the past 200 years and attribute things to government and to government action, more specifically, that has nothing to do with human action or the true results. And what this leads me to want to do is just give an economics 101 lesson. So here it is, economics 101 lesson. To start, economics fundamentally, when we look at what there is with trade among people, in other words, human interaction praxeology, fundamentally, when we look at the human issue, it's that human beings are finite. Okay? Can't be everywhere at once. We have bodies that demand things like air, water, food, things like that. So because we're imperfect at a fundamental level without psychological needs or wants, people have a need to develop and consume things in order to exist. Well, everything that is really about what economics is on the broad scale deals with creating wealth coming out of a state of poverty. We're all born into a state of poverty. You're born naked. You're born without nothing. So fundamentally, every economic question is not about why is there poverty, it's why is there wealth. Wealth is created because there are surpluses with those basic needs being met. Historically, all the nations which grew, especially out of the Fertile Crescent, were successful because they were able to herd animals. That's what changed them from being hunter-gatherers to becoming wealthy and having tons of animals, because animals and plants reproduce. If you're able to sequester your animals, if you're able to put a fence around your crops and manage them, they will grow. They will go exponential. And when that happens, you're able to trade because you have a surplus with other people. And people who trade because they focus their skills on what they're really good at, which is called specialization, can have greater surpluses and negotiate with others and eventually build and build and build their wealth. That's the fundamental elements of trade and economics. The idea is meeting those basic needs, but then going above and beyond. What creates the economic conditions to be able to move beyond those things? And that is specialization, individuals producing the most value that they can have subjectively with one another, and eventually, of course, producing enough in the aggregate to have leisure time to work on ways to improve those processes. How does this happen? This happens when people respect each other's bodies and respects each other's property. As I define it, and as many people often act, even if they don't believe it, how they act, in definition, is very Lockean. They mix their labor with what is unowned or unclaimed. Historically, that's how most people have gotten land or other types of things. There was nobody that was laying a claim, so someone mixes their labor. They till the ground, they put up a fence. Whatever it is, they combine their labor with the resource, claim ownership. Then people trade with others. When these boundaries are respected, in other words, someone respects another person's right to themselves, in other words, not to have physical intrusion by another, and someone respects the labor and resource that someone mixes, and those things start to accumulate, and there's less of a loss because someone isn't constantly destroying someone's hard work, destroying opportunities for other people, then you start to see wealth build. And this was very well accelerated, especially in early America. Why is that? Now, of course, a lot of people will talk about slavery. Yes, that was a huge wealth creation at a lot of people's expense. Absolutely. But it wasn't that which allowed those conditions to happen. Slavery is a horrible part of early American history, but that shouldn't be what's looked at as far as the mechanisms of what creates wealth. What creates wealth is the ability to trade goods and information. When that is free and uninhibited, that is where wealth starts to grow because people are able to specialize and transform what they have into things that produce more value more efficiently. And especially in early America, 1817 to about, of course, Civil War, very few regulations, no internal taxation because the U.S. was basically making money on imported goods and land grant sales. But that's really it. Most of America's wealth was created around then. And as you can imagine, it was a giant ball that was set into motion. And once that motion happened, those who were very wealthy at the time started to work with the government to curtail others and decrease competition. Why would they do this? Because the people wanted to have true monopolies, and it's not that there weren't price reductions. And I'm not going to demonize every single industrialist or anything like that. Absolutely not. This is a matter of those just simply who sought government-private partnerships to establish their monopolies and keep competition out. The prices of everything went down dramatically, even with steel and oil and things like that. Even though there were major things that were going across the world where individuals, especially like the Rockefellers, were gaining what seemed like monopolies because of just their growth, I mean, even into Russia. And so, with that in mind, what changed this dynamic was the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. The federal government began imposing all sorts of regulations and restrictions. They began doing the re-education of Americans through national standards in public schooling education, leading up to the early 1900s with the creation of colleges and really turning American workers into busy bee classes, standardizing everything. Nobody really wanted the elite class to have competition from innovators. They wanted to have everyone fill a role. That's why you go to college. There isn't a central banking major. There's not a, how do you beat out other businesses major. I mean, there's business majors, but there's nothing that's like truly innovative and grand scale. There really isn't. Don't believe me, please look for yourself. So taking that all into consideration, the growth in regulation, the growth in taxation, those things began to inhibit the free trade that occurred with people leading up, especially in the early to mid-late 1800s, before there was the big Civil War and hundreds of thousands of people dead and things like that. So with all that in mind now, this kind of like historical backdrop, I want to just very quickly dive into the ideas of rights as I first started talking about the right to self and the right to another person. And with rights, the change over of rights from being something that's on your own, a negative right to not have somebody infringe on you, started to change into positive rights, the rights for you to be provided with something. And the problem with that is that provision requires resource and personnel. So you have things like a healthcare bill. Well, someone is required to provide healthcare. Well, think about it this way, it's lowest common denominator. If nobody wanted to, that means someone has to be forced to. If there's not money for it, someone has to be forced, to pay for it. That's what where taxes come in. Taxes are monies taken from people by the threat of force. If you don't pay them, you go to jail. If you resist, all the way up to using lethal force, you will yourself be killed. Straight, pure and simple. And so when you take a look at the true nature of what it is to have a positive right, in other words, somebody else is being told that they owe you something, if it's education, because it takes another person, if we're talking about teachers, or healthcare, because that takes doctors, that's a problem. That begins to disintegrate the free trade of people, the ability to be basically free to choose your own destiny without having the government tell you exactly, what to do or what to produce, and destroying market signals that otherwise exist for people to innovate. So I just want to get a little bit of summary. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.